The whole reason I kind of went down this whole rabbit hole is because my kids were getting really, really sick because of the quality of the houses they were living in. Um, and we had to change that. We had to change that, and we had to make it work for us.
Welcome to the Passive House Podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House Podcast.
And I'm Zach Semke, coming to you from Seattle, Washington.
Welcome back to the Passive House Podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler, coming to you from Auckland in New Zealand. How's it going, Zach? I think we're in that sort of shoulder period where
that's right. We're getting cherry blossoms and plum blossoms,
cooling down a little bit,
and
on
some
my
some
side
nice
of the planet,
days.
and
We're still
warming
in
up a bit
Seattle.
on yours,
Still,
and
we're
we're
getting
probably
plenty
sort of meeting in the middle.
Cool rainy days, but it's spring. It's starting. Oh, I think we just passed it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we must be approaching the equinox as we record this. So just past it. There you go. Yeah. Equal days, equal nights.
That's great.
Starting to cool down for me. I'm starting to see a little bit more condensation around, which is always good for photographing thermal bridges early in the morning, which is could maybe be one of my pastimes when I go for a walk in the morning. All right. Well, we've got an interview that I did last week with friend, colleague, associate, fellow Passive House person from Auckland as well, Joe Lyth, who has been on the show before. And has recently gone out on his own and started his own practice. And we talk a little bit about that, plus his involvement with the Passive House Institute.
We sure
New
do.
Zealand,
so I want to start by thanking our sponsor of the week, Partel, and a big thank you to Partel for making all of our programming possible
Zach,
here at Passive House Accelerator this week. And Partel is also a founding sponsor, so they've been a longtime supporter of our work. So big thank you. Also, I'd like to thank our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. And thank you to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Ingui Architecture, Partel, Rockwell North America, and Solar Windows. And thank you to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Cascadia Windows and Doors, European Architectural Supply, Facro, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, LG Air Conditioning Technologies, and Source 2050.
Awesome. All right. Now, as I mentioned, Joe Lyth, he's a returning guest. We had him on the show in episode 63, so you can go and check that out if you'd like. And we cover some of Joe's background in that episode, how he got into architecture in the first place. This time around, we dive into him going out on his own, and as I said, his recent appointment as the chair of the board of Passive House Institute. Just a couple of translations, I guess, before we get into this. We do talk about H1, which is the part of the building code in New Zealand that deals with energy efficiency, and that is largely associated with the amount of insulation that's required. And of course, whenever we're talking about insulation, we generally are talking metric terms. So to translate that to non-metric, I think the multiplication is about 5. So our numbers might seem small, but just putting that in context. And Joe also talks about the average cost of his own home because he lives in a passive house. and he talks about a price range there, which is probably, I mean, it is an architecturally designed home, so there is a slight premium there, but it's still very, very cost effective when you consider
Yeah, so Joe
other
mentioned that the figure
architecturally
of 4 to
designed bespoke
6,000 New
homes.
Zealand
So,
dollars per square meter, and
what
that
did you
translates
estimate that to
to
be approximately, Zach?
372 to 557 New Zealand dollars per square foot.
Yeah. So yeah, don't get too hung up in the amount there, because, like I said, it is still an architecturally designed home, and there are some real cost savings, particularly around the kitchen and some of the internal fittings that Joe did himself. But he did go all out on the windows and the envelope, which he goes into a little bit. And then finally, we also talk about Homestar, which is something that I work on a daily basis at my work at the Green Building Council. And Homestar is it's an equivalent of LEED for homes in New Zealand. So it's New Zealand's environmental and sustainability rating for houses, which includes energy efficiency, but also all those other environmental considerations as well. All right, I think that's enough for our Southern Hemisphere translations. So let's get into my chat with Joe Lyth. Well, welcome to the podcast, Joseph Lyth. Joe, good to have you back. You were with us back in episode 63, but I know that you've been pretty busy since then. How have things been going?
Yeah, time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it? It's good, hectic, busy, new business, new roles. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think the last time you were on, we talked about bit about you and becoming an architect and moving to New Zealand. So people should go and check that out. Episode number 63, like I said, and you had recently completed your own home, which you've lived in for, well, it must be a few years now.
Nearly 4 already. Yeah,
And
nearly
how's
4
it
years.
going?
It does what it says on the tin. It's great, to be honest. Yeah. I mean, we've been here 4 years. I've been monitoring it with tether sensors for the past 3 and a bit, I think, just to kind of see what's happening. And yeah, for the first sort of 6 to 12 months, it was very much so important to have that monitoring to see how it's working. And we ended up having to tweak the ventilation system and other bits and pieces. But it's been great. And we had my family staying over Christmas. So we had 10 people staying in the house rather than 5. Didn't really overheat any more than the model was saying we should have done. So that was really cool. It was comfortable most of the time. And my parents went back to the UK and it was 4 degrees when they got off the plane. So that was a bit of a shock to the system, I think. But yeah, it's great. And we're just kind of slowly finishing things off. There's a retaining wall, which is nearly finished after about 2 years. And, we'll get there eventually.
So in the Auckland climate, relatively temperate. We do get cold though. Our winter's comfortable. Have you ever had issues in winter?
Not really. I mean, we get down to 0 degrees up here on this relatively exposed hillside. I mean, Auckland, it does get cooler, definitely. Even at the moment, I mean, it's only kind of shoulder seasons, and it's getting down to 10 degrees and some nights and things like that. Outside, yes, outside, absolutely outside. The coldest we've ever found in our house was 17 in the southwestern bedroom. That only really gets sun for the last sort of hour or 2 of the day in winter, due to the orientation and the context. And yeah, other than that, it's comfortable all the time. We've got a little $15 fan heater from Bunnings we pull out for a couple of days during winter, and that's all we really need.
So do you have any mechanical cooling? You don't have a heat pump?
We don't yet, no. So that was something that it was in my mind during the design process, but it was something that just wasn't going to fit in our budget. So, and also kind of a good, as I say in most of these things, like we're a good guinea pigs. Do we need it? Do we not? And I would say we do, but only for a very small amount of the year. It's only that kind of, few days in winter when it drops a little bit, or maybe a week or two in summer. More to do with humidity than temperatures, because, 25 degrees at 50% humidity is very, very different comfort levels to 25 degrees at 85% humidity sort of thing. And like during summer, we live with our doors open all the time. You can do that in a passive house, as most people will know now. But that means that the humidity can enter the building easier, essentially, because your outdoor air is coming in more. So yeah, I mean, during the summer, comfort rather than temperature's a big thing. And sleeping in 24, 25 degrees with 80% humidity is not that great. So we've got a fan in the bedroom we pull out, which helps just get that air movement over our skin. But yeah, a small ducted heat pump is what we're looking at getting at the moment, just to take the edge off and passively manage humidity, basically.
So you don't have fixed ceiling fans?
No, that is something else I'm potentially looking at. Our master bedroom's in a roof space, basically, in a gable roof. So it's sloping ceilings. So making a ceiling fan could be interesting. Finding one that will fit, basically, balancing the angles of the roof with the height of the ceiling and stuff like that. But it's just a crappy old fan we store in the eaves most of the year and pull out for. But it's cost effective. Again, I think it cost us like, $50 from good old Bunnings again.
Yeah. And I know that you did some external shading yourself as well, some external blinds, which is
I'm gonna have to get sponsored by Bunnings at this rate. Yeah, we it was always the intention to put some blinds on the western elevation. That is where our view is. That's where most of our glass is. That isn't the best design approach, but you always need to balance the context and the client needs with the performance. So we've got lots of west glazing, which means in the evening, especially in summer, you get quite a lot of solar gain before the sun goes down. And you could see it quite quickly. 4 o'clock in summer, 3:30, the sun would dip underneath. We've got a 3-meter overhang on the west, but as soon as the sun went under there, you get like a degree or two temperature increase in the living space quite quickly. So we had intended to save up for some, custom-sized digital control blinds that could go down. And then I walked to the Bunnings one day and there was a trolley of patio blinds for $20 each in the entrance. So I just bought 6 of those, and they're great. We just lower them down when the sun gets underneath the deck in summer, and it really, really helps, actually.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so, you find it's manageable now. And I think it's worth emphasizing that summer temperature and humidity, like you say, are really the bigger issues rather than keeping warm in the middle of winter.
Definitely. Yeah, without question. Yeah. I mean, in PHVP, I think we had 13.6 kilowatt hours heating demand, and the overheating risk was at 2.9% from memory. But I suppose it comes down to comfort. So like we'll be sitting in the sitting room and I'll be in t-shirt and shorts, and I'll be fine. And my wife will be having a blanket over her legs, and it's like, Sarah, it's 22 degrees in here. What are you doing? So So that comes down to individual comfort. But overheating is, in my mind, more of a consideration. Because it's uncomfortable being hot. Basically, you can warm up by, I probably shouldn't say this in a passive house, but you can warm up by putting some trousers and a jumper on to take that slight edge off. But it's harder to get cool than it is to warm up, definitely.
Yeah. How has living in a passive house influenced your work as an architect? And obviously, you've more recently gone out on your own, which I know has been quite a big move for you personally. But has it changed your perspective in your own work, actually living in a passive house?
It's just invaluable. like absolutely. Yeah, doing that whole process of designing it, modeling it, helping to build it, and then monitoring and inhabiting it, it just gives you insight that you just couldn't have otherwise at all. And things like, yes, it's only 2.9% overheating, but living in 2.9% overheating, how is that actually from a comfort perspective for the outcomes? Because it's all about the outcomes. You could be certified on paper, but it's about the people living it at the end of the day, and are they going to be comfortable or not, really? And also how to operate the building, and things I'd wish I'd done. I'm working on a project at the moment for some clients, and they kind of came to me and they said, we want yours, but slightly bigger. So the project, it's ending up very, very similar to ours, but with all the things I'd wish we'd managed to fit in. So it's kind of like lowest that'll take two. Yeah, basically, yeah. And it's interesting. Yeah, it's different, but it's it's bigger, and it's, in my mind, better so far, which is fine.
Right.
We still love our house, but so yeah, I mean, it informs everything I do, definitely. And I'm sure people are sick of me talking about it, but it's just been great.
One of the features of your house was how you emphasize the importance and dedicate a lot of your budget to windows, and the envelope, a lot of which is now hidden, and saved on some of the internal fittings, like doing the kitchen yourself, and keeping that at a pretty low budget.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that you're able to convince other people to do, or is that off the table for most of your clients?
Within Well, so my new company is Well Architecture, WEL. My kids are William, Emily, and Lily, so that was quite fortuitous with the name. But
good planning.
Yeah, absolutely. But the clients that have come to me so far are people that have read about, heard about, recognized the process that I've gone through with our own house. And they are on board with this process of prioritizing performance. Finishes can be later, sort of thing. And we've been in here for 4 years, and we've got 3 rambunctious children that like to slam doors and, throw things around and all sorts of bits and pieces. And other than a kitchen drawer sticking a little bit, everything's great. We spent $4,500 on all of the fittings for the bathrooms and kitchen. And then $2,000 on the timber for the kitchen cabinets. And that's it. So that's, under 10K, easily under 10K for all of the main cabinetry fittings and finishes, and it's 4 years and they're fine. There's nothing wrong with them, And yeah, one day we'd like to replace them, maybe, but they're doing the job, and what's the point when your kids are young and they're trashing things all the time? I make them sound awful. They're not that bad, but
well, it also means you don't have to be so paranoid all the time about something 100%. Getting broken or damaged, because you could easily spend that whole budget that you spent on your bathrooms and kitchen on one element in the kitchen.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I went down to Fisher and Paykel's amazing experience centre in Central Auckland last week, and man, those kitchens, incredible. And one day. But right now, this works great. It does what it needs to. It's functional. It's still, very attractive. I still love the linings we've got in the bathrooms, and my nice plywood kitchen, and got copper splashbacks, which I went down to the airport and picked up from a company down there and installed myself. And they're kind of getting this beautiful patina, and my cast concrete sink and countertop, which I did with a couple of bags of Maxcrete, again from good old Bunnings, and they're still great, and they're still functioning, and they're always kind of a talking piece when people come. So it is possible to have that level of interest. It doesn't have to be kind of melamine things off the shelf. You can still do something different, but you don't have to put all the money into it. And the money we saved on that, our windows, our ventilation system, it works.
You mentioned Well, and how long's that been going now?
7 months. September last year is when I kind of took the leap.
Yeah. And I remember you were quite nervous about doing that, but were suddenly quite busy as soon as you did do that. Looking back in the last few years, you gave one example already of the fact that people had seen your house and it has been featured around the place. You've opened it to Passive House Open Days, so people have come felt it and been there and experienced it, not just seen it in articles and online. What else do you think you personally have done to raise your profile?
I talk a lot. It's probably it. I
Yeah.
talk a lot and I say yes to way too much. It's probably my two biggest problems. I suppose, like, it was interesting. I was at an event last week, and I was chatting to somebody that I've known for a while, and what did he said? Something like, some people seem to be in it for the exposure, but you seem to actually give a shit, basically.
Yep.
And I suppose that's true. The whole reason I kind of went down this whole rabbit hole is because my kids were getting really, really sick because of the quality of the houses they were living in. And we had to change that. And we had to make it work for us. And we didn't have a lot of money. And yes, I'm sure some people think our projects are one-off because I'm an architect and probably got kickbacks, et cetera, et cetera. But I've got 7 houses on the go at the moment in my practice. And all of them are not bonkers expensive. They're kind of sitting between 4,000 to 6,000 per square meter, if that, for certified passive house projects, which is nothing in the New Zealand market at the moment, especially. But yeah, I don't know. I just kind of really, I cared, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And I spent a long time kind of wanting to make this work for other people, and kind of realize that, and talking about it and teaching it as well as kind of designing it for my own projects. So that's when I kind of thought, right, if I'm going to do this, my current job, as much as I love it, isn't the place to do it. So I'm going to have to go out on my own. So why not set up a business in the middle of a recession?
Yeah.
If I can make it work, then I can make it work anytime, sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I kind of set up the company to have 3 pillars, as my friend Damien calls them, which is design, consult, and teach. So I design buildings, I'm designing trail shelters up and down the country, as well as houses. So, beautiful things and spaces for people. And then there's consult. So I bought a blower door, so I do air tightness testing, thermal bridge modeling, thermal reviews, and then I act as a passive house and homestar consultant on projects as well. And then teach, I do the homestar designer course, so I teach people build energy modeling and building science. And then I've got some lectures booked in at various unis and do presentations and things. And yeah, just those 3 pillars are enabling me to kind of do the things I care about, which is helping others along the journey I've already been on, sort of thing, getting people on the road. And even my new role as chair of the Passive House Institute over here, it's kind of like, people might think that means I'm passive house or die, but in reality, it's like that is the end goal, absolutely. But there's a long journey to get there, and there are a lot of people at different points of that journey. Lots of different bus stops along the way, and we need to try and get people on the bus at whatever point they are to get them towards that end goal, really. So, yeah.
What's your assessment of the state of passive house in this part of the world? I mean, I know you fairly familiar with what's going on in Australia and sort of relationship between New Zealand and Australia, but where do you see passive house in 2025 in the Australia and New Zealand?
It's been a difficult couple of years. I mean, the industry's bottomed out here, definitely. And it's still very difficult for a lot of people. And due to the priorities in construction here, people often let performance drop to the side in favour of just getting something built. I was at an air tightness summit a couple of days ago, and oh God, come on, brain, what's his name again? Sean Maxwell had a great slide that said, do you care about air tightness when you're trying to buy a house? And something like, 85% of the people said, no, of course not. And he made the point that people just want something to live in sometimes. When it comes down to the crunch, a tent's better than a branch, so you can't look down on, or you can't kind of begrudge people wanting just something that's comfortable at the end of the day, or, a roof over their head. So I think a lot of it's got to that point. People have kind of stripped it back, and they just want a house, and things are so bloody expensive here anyway, the general perception is if you ask for higher performance, it will mean more expensive. So don't bother asking for it, sort of thing. So it's difficult. It is difficult trying to push or advocate for higher levels of performance, especially around, we had the H1 upgrades last year, and buildings are overheating more. And media perception and general public perception is, you've added insulation, which has caused overheating. Whereas in reality is a lot of people understand it's more to do with the way we design buildings. Previously, heat would lose quickly, so we had big windows to gain lots of solar gain, and now we're building to higher levels of performance. The design of the building is resulting in them overheating, sort of thing. But media is kind of showing, higher performance means more heat gain, which means more insulation, which means more overheating, and people are beginning to say, I don't want higher performance, I don't want to overheat. So there's all these different kind of perceptions and thoughts around how people see better building.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, I think a lot of it was kind of during COVID, when people stuck in their houses for nearly a year, and they realised how crap they actually are. So they want some way of doing better. I just think a lot of people don't know what that is, and are giving a lot of information and misinformation. So I suppose my kind of drive for being on the board now is kind of taking Passive House off the pedestal and getting it down in the crowd, kind of democratizing it, and just talking to the wider industry and everyone to try and explain how it's not an add-on, it's not a crazy over-the-top thing. It is just the basic principles of what buildings need. And if you start with that foundation of these basic functions of how a building needs to perform, then it doesn't have to cost more, and, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. You mentioned the Air Tightness Summit, and we'll probably talk more about that in future episodes, because there's quite a lot in that space. I mean, just for context for international listeners, New Zealand, how would you describe New Zealand's place in the world when it comes to air tightness?
It's a lot of hot air, but it all leaks out quite a lot. Yeah, I mean, we don't consider air tightness at all in our construction or building code or anything like that, basically. There's no requirement, and people see it as a bad thing. I mean, we're still in the sphere of, and I hate to say it to kind of add to it, but buildings need to breathe, supposedly. And, we only got insulation back in like the 60s or something like that. So it's really
mid-70s in New Zealand.
70s, yeah. So kind of prior to that, people are still like, you need to allow your buildings to dry out. So they need leaks to allow air to, not to mention the ventilation side of things. People think you can just open a window and maybe that might work if you're on a hillside, but then you might overventilate, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a lot of it's a difficult sell, to be perfectly honest, air tightness.
And I had a chat with Barry Cope on the show last week in the lead up to that Air Tightness Summit. And one of the things I was keen to hear from him, which we did talk about, was how that journey's happened already overseas, and how we can accelerate that, because it wasn't always the case that the UK had 100% air tightness blow door testing requirement, which they do today. And I'm interested in how they got from 0 to 100%. And so that we can hopefully not take 20 years to do that here, and what are we going to have to do to condense that to get that happening? Because I see that as one of those significant steps, as you were saying, in getting people on that journey, because they're not all going to be passive houses, but there's no reason why the rest of the market can't be benefiting from one of those basic principles of air tightness, and seeing the benefits in so many parts of the, it's not just energy efficiency, it's acoustics and smoke and comfort and
I thought Barry had some really good slides, speaking plainly, and reducing it from numbers and facts and figures to experiential quality of doing it. And as you say, it's not as noisy if you're next to a road. You don't have to smell next door's cooking or somebody smoking outside. It's not as drafty. You don't have those, cold spots in the rooms where there might be an air leak that you don't really realize, or et cetera, et cetera. It's all those benefits. And it's that, but it does come down to that understanding of infiltration is not ventilation. Little holes in your wall will not give you sufficient makeup air or air to exchange the moisture and the CO2 and the VOCs and whatever else you've got inside. You need to have a defined pathway for any building, no matter how airtight it is. Little holes don't, there's nobody sat outside pumping enough air into the building and then pulling it out somewhere else. It's just not going to happen. So, they go hand in hand.
So where do you stand on where we should be aiming to get people to in terms of something like airtightness? Do we need every new house to be built to 0.6 air changes, or is something more leaky than that enough?
It's interesting because I've spoken to quite a few people about this, and a lot of the consensus is once you get under 1, there's much more diminishing returns, basically. And there is a discussion to be had as to where we need to be in New Zealand around efficiency. Most of I think we spoke about this the other day, but any new building in New Zealand, we're probably looking at sort of over 100 kilowatt hours per meter squared to heat it, basically. Low energy building standard from PHI is 30. Passive house is 15. So even if the low energy building standard is like 3 times better than we're doing at the moment. And air tightness, there's so many different facets to this. It's the type of buildings we build. We build primarily timber frame with fluff in the walls. And so that is the worst type of construction you can possibly have for having air leaks, because as soon as moisture gets into it, there's a lot of risk there, So achieving high levels of air tightness is less about the energy savings and more about the increasing the durability of the buildings. And there was a great presentation from brands, and most of their testing is showing that new builds are already achieving sort of, I think it was between 3 and 5 or 3 and 7 air changes as it is, due to adding insulation and building more airtight. And that was really interesting because Barry was saying the UK is achieving about 4, whereas brands are saying that already without trying we're hitting 3. So that was quite an interesting point.
In some cases.
In some cases, yeah. So just doing it, we just need to start doing something, and there just isn't enough data to suggest where we're sitting at the moment. So the more testing we do, the more results we get, the more we can see where we're at. And then we've got, okay, we're already at 3. Great. Okay, let's aim for 1. We're already at 8. Okay, crap, we better aim for 3. We need to just begin. And it'd be great to say, no, everybody has to do 0.6, but that's just not real. When you talk to, general builders and stuff, and it might be quite simple to do that. It might just be a question of taping the bottom of the plasterboard to the floor and putting airtight flush boxes on sockets and other bits and pieces like that. And, several of the presentations said how airtight LED lights are already. So they're less of an issue than they have been, et cetera, et cetera. So it might actually not be that difficult to get down to reasonable levels. But until we start measuring, we don't really know where we're really at, sort of thing. Yeah.
Where to from here, Joe? What are your plans for the rest of this year and then into next year?
Keep going. Stay on top of the work. Yeah. Well, it was. Yeah, I started it panicking a bit, but knowing that this is just something I needed to do to see if it would work or not. And when you start a new business, you kind of reach out and try and get as many opportunities as possible in the hope that maybe 10% of them will come through, and 90% of them came in. So I kind of suddenly had loads of really exciting projects. So
7 houses for a 1-person practice is a reasonable workload.
It's weekends aren't really weekends anymore, but I'm loving it. And things seem to be kind of balancing all right at the moment. But then there's kind of balancing out with the advocacy and the teaching and the all that kind of stuff. So the intention was to give it a year and see how things are going. We're nearly 7 months in, and I could hire somebody else on board definitely, but I just feel it's a bit soon to get somebody full time, especially with the fact that the industry is still a bit up in the air, especially here in New Zealand at the moment. So just keep going. Keep trying to sleep. Keep trying to deliver good buildings.
Well, at least you have a very comfortable house to sleep in.
We do,
hopefully,
doesn't change my stress levels though, but it's my own stress. That was the thing. I loved where I worked, but probably the OCD side of me, it's I'm the one that kind of has to do it now. And it's a little bit difficult, working on your own, sitting in this beautiful house all on my own half the time. It's difficult to not bounce ideas off people. So I try and get out a day a week and go and see other people and annoy you for lunch and other bits and pieces. But
much appreciated.
Yeah, I'm loving it. I've never been happier, to be perfectly honest. And it's just great to be able to do this.
Well, keep up the good work. People can find you wellarchitecture.nz.
That's the one.
Is that the best place to reach out?
Yeah, or Joe at wellarchitecture.nz. It's just one L in well.
Awesome.
Or LinkedIn or Instagram, or I get around.
Nice. Well, thank you very much, Joe. Really appreciate it. And keep it up. And perhaps we'll check in again next year, see how much Well's grown.
And that was Joe Lyth, and you can find him and his work at Well Architecture now. So you can check that out. What do you think, Zach?
Great conversation, and really cool to hear what he has been doing for the last 7 months. And I think it's an inspiring story, right? For folks who are thinking about taking the leap and focusing on the mission of their work and jumping in with both feet. It's cool to see Joe do that and be thriving so much.
It is a big leap to take, and I know that there are lots of people in our community who have done similar things or have thought about doing a similar move. And a lot of people also tend to get involved in the community and get their name out there, whether they're doing some education stuff or networking on LinkedIn or just being involved with the community. And I think that goes a long way to establishing a potential client base, but also just getting people's name out there. So yes, he was going from a consultancy and going from a big firm to his own business, but there was a lot of groundwork that he had done prior to that, which I think would be similar to a lot of people in this community who don't tend to work in silos, even if they've been working their whole career so far in a large consultancy.
Well, and it sure seems right. Having designed and built his own house, its own passive house, was a big deal. I was also struck by the motivation there, and that was that his kids were getting sick. They kept on getting sick from the houses they were living in. So, passive house makes a lot of sense, and it also makes sense that the name of his firm is WEL, both for his kids, but also but also right, exactly, but also the mission to create healthy environments.
Yeah, it's a sad anecdote that I hear so often about people coming here or growing up here or in other places as well, in homes that are just not fit for purpose, and then making the move to a well-insulated, well-ventilated house, and suddenly, being a lot better. And it's really hard to quantify that in a scientific way, but the anecdotal evidence seems quite strong, and I know of studies that have done some really good assessment of that correlation, which is definitely there. But when you hear stories of that from a personal level, of it just being so apparent, I've also heard Joe speak of the fact that they just even get they recover a lot quicker because the kids, they're quite young, so they still get sick when they go and interact with people at childcare and school. But even when that happens now, they seem to recover a lot faster. And there'll be other factors. They're living on a block out in the country, so they're probably getting lots of fresh air as well. But there's definitely something to be said for the wider benefits of having a healthy environment at home, which aren't going to be quantifiable by just looking at your power bill.
Yeah, well said. And I mean, can you imagine? I mean, that's so stressful to be in a building that is making you sick. Conversely, coming home to a building that keeps you well, or is supporting your health and your wellness, must be a really great feeling.
Yeah. Well, Joe's also said, and I've heard this many times as well, that one of his biggest problems now in the morning is knowing what to wear,
outside.
because he doesn't know what temperature it is outside. Whereas my 1950s uninsulated house, I'm very aware of what the temperature is outside every morning.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So yeah, and I've also brought up Joe's example that he's walking the talk, which I still find very hard to convince other people to do, but he is such a good example of spending as much of their budget as they possibly can on the envelope and specifically the windows.
Yeah.
And in his case, I mean, he really took it to an extreme. He did the kitchen largely himself out of plywood, and saved a huge amount on fancy tapware and just got some cheap stuff that's still functional and still looks fine.
Yeah.
But that is completely the opposite of what a lot of people do and what gets marketed to people in terms of these beautiful kitchens and amazing and expensive tapware and fittings. And all of the stuff that gets hidden, like inside the walls, is where the budget tends to get cut. And from a performance point of view, it totally makes sense to do what Joe's done and put a lot of the budget into the envelope first. But it's really hard to convince other people of doing that.
Right. Well, maybe as resilience and health become more and more something that we're all thinking about, that'll start to shift because it sure makes a lot more sense to have a healthy environment than to have, some fancy countertops instead of what sound like really cool kind of, concrete countertops.
Yeah,
Why not?
it does. Yeah. Which is, it's just harder to take photos of some of that invisible stuff. And
that's right.
But you mentioned the open days, and that's been another really great thing that Joe has done, is opened up his house. And it's a little way out of town, but people go out there and visit, and that always makes an impression. And that's such a valuable thing that I know a lot of passive house enthusiasts and passive house owners are very happy to do that, just because that is the best way of convincing people is getting that feel of walking into a passive house, and then it all comes. You suddenly understand stuff that you don't get just from looking at a photo.
Yeah, so true. And that reminds me, you both were speaking about kind of the state of the industry in New Zealand and also Australia. And so I wanted to share, just a couple of days ago, one of the members of the Reimagined Buildings Collective is a builder who focuses on retrofits, and he's based in Montreal. And he's very excited because he just landed his first passive house retrofit job, which is that's a big hurdle to get that first one, right? And as you're building up your portfolio and also your chops as a practitioner and all that. And he said it was really easy to sell the job because the clients were from Australia and they knew about passive house from being in Australia. So
Wow.
yeah, I know. And I was like, that's cool. So
That's
these
cool.
things like these, so the message I think that sends to me is that, like, these things like the open days and the advocacy that Finns is doing and the Australia Passive House Association is doing, and the work that I think sometimes it feels like it's small and it's frustrating. You can feel impatient, but
Yeah.
it has um, more impact than you might think. I
Yep.
think is
Yep.
I
And
think.
I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, I listened to your podcast a few years ago, and then I started thinking about stuff, and then that's the thing with building in general, that sometimes these things take years
Right.
to come to fruition, and you sort of plant that seed, and then it's not like just selling a widget where you do a fancy marketing campaign, and then you
Yeah.
watch your numbers the next day. It's a much longer turnaround time. But that's all the important work that everyone in this community is part of just like planting those
Yep.
seeds and fostering those ideas. And it takes a bit of time, but it can have huge impact.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the Massachusetts story, right? Like, I
Yeah.
don't know, 6 years ago, there was one certified passive house in Massachusetts, and now there are 22 million square feet, kind of in the pipeline.
Yeah, and some
uh,
pretty significant plans
yeah.
to make that part of the code, or
Yeah. Right. No.
near to
Right.
that part
Yeah.
of the
Yeah.
code.
Exactly.
Mm,
It is code for many
yeah,
cities now in
yeah.
Massachusetts, which is awesome.
Very good stuff. Yeah, I always enjoy catching up with people like Joe. Definitely walking the talk. You can, like I say, you can catch him at Well Architecture and also at the Passive House Institute New Zealand. We are also, we try and stay quite closely connected with what's going on in Australia as well, to leverage off each other in this part of the world. So some really good stuff. We were both involved in some air tightness workshops last week, which were also quite good fun, because we've got a long way to go in that. That industry doesn't really exist yet in New Zealand, so that's a big part of what we're trying to do, is grow the understanding and the market for blower door testing and air tightness in general here. So a lot of work to be done. You mentioned the collective there, Zach. What's going on over there at the moment?
Yeah, so a lot happening at the collective. We still have our honeybee pH course is still open. The first cohort, it actually closes this week. So if you're interested in that, you'll want to join the collective and dive in. But this is the course taught by Ed May about honeybee pH, which is a tool that helps integrate with a single source of truth in terms of the data, integrate 3D models with passive house models and energy modeling, to optimize the workflow to be able to deliver passive house models either through PHPP or through Woofy Passive. So super, super cool, very comprehensive course with office hours on a regular basis with Ed. So that you can check that out. On Friday, we have an Ask Me Anything with Ilka Cassidy on panelization of passive house. Ilka Cassidy, of course, is a regular co-host here at the Passive House podcast, so I'm really excited about that. And then on Monday, April 7th, we are joined by Jacob Recusen, who is with Builders for Climate Action, and he will be presenting an embodied carbon course that also introduces the BEAM tool and the BEAM's application to projects, and how you can use that tool to reduce the upfront carbon of the materials that are going into it in a real streamlined way. So that's happening. There's a lot more, but that's probably enough on the collective. Then at the Passive House Accelerator on Wednesday, our Passive House Accelerator live episode is a 101 called Solar Energy Implementation at Passive House Standards. And that's with the folks from Brooklyn Solar Works. So that really looking forward to that as well. Solarization is the theme of the month at the Accelerator. So we're kicking it off with that 101.
Nice. As always, there's a lot going on over at the Accelerator and also in the collective. So definitely check those out. you can join up on to the collective over on the Passive House Accelerator web page. There's a link to that in the menu. So get into that. Heaps of great resources. I use some of the freely available resources all the time still when people are looking for icons and just images, and letting people know what Passive House is if they're just hearing about it for the first time. I use the accelerator as the Passive House 101 as a really good way to introduce other people to what it's all about. Great. All right. Hey, thanks for that, Zach.
Thank you, Matthew. That was a great interview. It was fun.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. And we'll be back again next week here on the Passive House podcast.